a huge spectrum of universities, colleges. They had on folk singers. Folk singers appeared on the television. You had two folk-orientated shows, one on BBC, one on STV. You had the Jimmy Shans on the one side, and Scottish bands got more prominence. There was a whole huge explosion of folk music, which, although it carried on, in fact it carried on right through Europe, it has settled down now, where, well, for instance, once folk music got going in Fife, there was 18 clubs in Fife. Now I think there's maybe 2 or 1. You know, it has settled down. But on the other hand, there's the massive stuff on recorded music that is now available, and for the bigger concerts there are still audiences, but it has settled down because pop music is so good now. There's a lot of tremendous pop music.
I'd like to come back to the House, because when you left in '64, it lay empty only for a few weeks before being taken over by the high school former pupils. Now, I wasn't quite sure if Tommy Bonner was actually responsible for that, but Tommy Bonner, who we mentioned earlier, actually went back into the House in Chalmers Street and started another folk song club.
That's correct. Tommy Bonner, who I first met him at the Brucefield in the early '60s, but he was still at school, and he had learned to play guitar and was singing, and he became a very good friend of Bob Davenport. And of course, Tommy Bonner's father knew Ewan MacColl, and in fact the first time I met Tommy Bonner's father was down in Ewan MacColl's Singers Club in London. That was the first, and then I met Tommy. And Tommy was and is still a very good singer, and he went back into the House, but of course he was still involved with us, and he opened up, as you say, I think the former pupils, and he ran it very successfully there, in conjunction with everything else that was going on. But Tommy is a very fine singer and still sings. In fact, until recently he sung in a group with Neil Patterson from along the road here, and Pete Shepherd, and they went down to England and did gigs. This is only within a year ago. Tommy's still singing, and an excellent singer. He's an art teacher in Edinburgh. But his father was a very fine writer, and of course wrote that book, Stuarty, a very fine book about mining life, railway life rather, in Fife, and I have it up the stairs actually. And he also wrote poetry and wrote very good articles, and he was a great union man in the railways. Tommy Bonner's father, Bob.
He also formed the House Band, which you later went on to front when Tommy moved south. Tell us something about the House Band, because there are a few characters in it.
Oh yes, there were. Well, it was Tommy that got that together. There was Johnny Boys on fiddle. Johnny's still alive. He's in a home in Dunfermline, and Jim Dunn from Kelty on the accordion. And Tommy formed the House Band, and then went away down south to London, and came to me one day and said, "Look, would you take it over, because I'm leaving?" So I took it over, and we did the clubs together, me, Johnny and Jim, and had a lot of good laughs. And Johnny wore this little pork pie hat, but he was nice player, beautiful tone, like playing viola and violin. And Jim was a good accordionist. I don't think Jim plays now. I haven't seen him for many years, but we had a lot of fun with the House Band.
Then one of his claim to fame, Johnny Boyce, was he not the finest fiddle player in Shires Mill?
That was one of Johnny's jokes. Some guy had spoken to him and said, "He's the finest fiddle player in Shires Mill." And of course, there's only about 3 houses in Shires Mill. And one of Johnny's ones, Johnny played a lot of bum notes on the fiddle. You know, he had a beautiful tone, but his timing wasn't 100%. And he'd go, and then he would turn round and wink, and he would say, "In the land of the blind, the one-eyed man is king."
I'm happy to remember Johnny Boyce with a lot of good memories of my involvement in the House. And You mentioned Kenny Slavin. Now this is where I got involved with the Hove in 1968. Because Kenny Slavin was a bit of an entrepreneur in the late 60s who had this idea of putting variety type shows on the road, although not variety in the terms of Chick Murray and the likes, more of go-go dancers, discos, folk group, pop music group, and of course he had a blues band as well, and he toured all over Fife, Dundee and everything with this. But Kenny would come back to the house, and Kenny was quite was quite good with the folk music in the house as well. And he ran it for about a year and a half there as well.
Yes. Oh yes. I first came across Kenny at what we used to call rugby hops down in the Brucefield Hotel. The rugby club used to run dances, and Kenny would appear there like dancing about with a chair by himself wearing a rugby jersey. He was an amateur winder at the time, and a very alive character. In fact, when we went to the Kinema Ballroom, on the committee was Kenny Slavin and Mike Greenwood. That's Jimmy Greenwood, the international rugby player's brother. And Kenny was always a mover in these kind of things. And as you say, Kenny went into the house and was running a kind of alternative kind of stuff. But I don't know about that aspect because I was never in it in these days. But I heard lots of stories about it. And of course, I knew Kenny fine, you know. Well, he was a real live character, Kenny.
You dropped out of folk music for a couple of years, but you come back in the big way with the formation of the Great Fife Roadshow, John. I couldn't have you...
Correction, I didn't drop out at any time. The Great Fife Roadshow was a group of 10 of us or so who got together in the winter, December, I think it was, December 1969, and originally we used to go up to St Andrew's Folk Club when it met in the Star Hotel, and of course I was friendly with people like Davy Stewart and Jimmy Hutchison, Rob Noakes, and people like that, and Davy Craig and whatnot, and we formed a group of people. It was a kind of variety folk show, and we called it Sharabang, and we took it through to Strathclyde University where we did a night. And Davy Stewart at the end of the night said, you know, Sharabang's not a very good name. I think we should call it the Great Fife Roadshow. You know, we weren't hesitant about shoving ourselves forward, so we called it the Great Fife Roadshow, and we didn't do very much of it until maybe July of the next year. Oh no, sorry, in December we went down to Sudbury, Cambridge and Colchester and some other place, I can't remember. But at that time I think there was only 6 or 7 of us. And then in 1970 we did the big summer tour, which was, it was ridiculous. It was like 29 nights out of 31 or something, where we traipsed all over Scotland, from Dumfries in the south right up to Ullapool and Tain and Nairn and excuse me, and we had worked out how much money we were going to make, and we thought, oh yeah, this will be great. But at the end of the tour we had to do about 4 concerts to pay off our debts, because we all travelled in cars and tents and this kind of thing. Well, of course we distributed thousands of bills everywhere we went. You see, what we did, you would come to Ullapool and or rather Fort William, then you would do the show at Fort William, and then several of us would go in and stay in Ullapool and get up early in the morning and race round with like 1,000 leaflets and all this kind of thing. And of course we had already been up weeks before putting up posters and all this sort of thing. So I mean, it was a pretty good kind of machine, and it rolled on pretty well. And in fact, Ullapool, I always remember, we had so many people, mind you, it was only in the village hall, that we ran one show, and then we went round, we had a break of half an hour, we went round the pubs with leaflets, and then we ran another show, so it was a double header. It was quite amazing.